welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. I hope everyone is doing well. Today we're going to be talking about a high-profile case out of Mongolia, a case where a young conservation researcher mysteriously died in 2015. His name was Leopard Tomorsukh, and we're going to talk about him today and his case. I know it's been a while since I posted a video, and I've really missed doing it. I've mostly been busy with school. I also went to Jordan for 2 weeks, which was really interesting. But also, one of my best friends had a stroke about 6 weeks ago, and that's been really difficult to deal with. She's doing better now, but she has a long road to recovery ahead of her, and I guess I was a little bit out of it for a while. But anyway, there are so many cases I want to cover, and this is just one of them. So I will go ahead and get started. So Mongolia is the most sparsely populated country on Earth. It is home to 3.3 million people, and it is situated right between Russia and China. Mongolia was a satellite state of the Soviet Union before the Soviet Union started collapsing around 1990, at which point Mongolia underwent a peaceful transition to democracy and a market-based economy. Leopard Tomorsukh, also known as Sumbee, was born on April 6, 1988, in Arktemir, Arkhangai Province, which is a small town in central Mongolia. There are only about 5,000 people in this town, and the main occupation is animal husbandry. So people have goats, sheep, cattle, and horses mostly. Sumbee was the eldest of 4 children. He had 1 little brother and 2 little sisters. Their father's name is Tomorsukh, and he was a researcher and biologist and director of Kovsgol Lake National Park for over 20 years. And part of his job was to be a forest ranger, so he would actually ride a reindeer around the shores of the lake to try to catch poachers and people who were fishing illegally. Here's a picture of him riding his reindeer, which is just amazing. It's so badass. The animals that Tomorsukh felt most passionately about were the ibex, which is a mountain goat, and the argali, which is a mountain sheep. And both of those live out in the wild. I read that Sumbee's mother, Nara, was also involved in conservation, but I couldn't find any other info out about that. Sumbee was an excellent student, very intelligent, and he started school at the National University of Mongolia in 2006 and graduated with a degree in biology and zoology in 2010. Mongolia actually has a long history of conservation going all the way back to the 12th century under Genghis Khan. It was illegal to hunt or do any mining or disturb the land around 14 mountains at that time. Sumbee started working as an intern with the Leopard Conservation Foundation in 2009, and his job was to set up what's called camera traps. Camera traps are infrared cameras that detect motion, and the purpose of them was to watch snow leopards and see how often they came by, where they were, how many there were, to try to track their movements. When I read that Sumbee was working with the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation, I got a little bit excited because snow leopards have always been kind of like my spirit animal. When I was 6 years old, my grandmother asked me what I wanted to be for Halloween, and I said I wanted to be a snow leopard. And I ended up making my own costume, which was really just drawing black spots on some white clothing with a Sharpie. And it didn't turn out that well. I wouldn't recommend it, but that was my first thought and instinct when I was a child. Obviously, as you can see, snow leopards are just absolutely adorable. The Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation was founded in 2007 by a woman named Bayara, and her story is absolutely amazing. I'm going to go into it a little bit more later, but I would highly recommend reading about her and her life. It's really, really inspiring. But in 2008, they had just started their first long-term study of snow leopards in Mongolia. They're a partner of the Snow Leopard Trust, which is based in Seattle. The Snow Leopard Trust was born from actually a woman named Helen Freeman, who was a volunteer docent at the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle, and she just fell in love with snow leopards, and she became what's known as the Jane Goodall of snow leopards. But more about that later. So during this time, Sumbee discovered that he had a real passion for both snow leopards and their main prey, which is the ibex, the wild mountain goat. The largest population of snow leopards in Mongolia live in the Tost Mountains, which is in the South Gobi Desert near the border with China. In 2009, Bayara discovered that a huge section of the Tost Mountains were basically going to be up for grabs by mining companies. I believe what these mining companies were mining was coal and copper, but maybe there were other minerals, I'm not totally sure. So when Bayara learned this, she started what would become an epic battle to save the Tost Mountains and the snow leopard's habitat there. And this journey would go on for years and involve all levels of government, the media, the communities involved, and of course, standing up to the mining companies. That same year in 2009, one of the only 23 snow leopards known to be living in the Tost Mountains was found dead. It had been shot by a herdsman because it was trying to attack his herd. And this is actually a really common way that snow leopards are killed. So when this happened, the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation was able to swoop in with a whole host of solutions. So one thing they did was they educated herdsmen about how to make better fences that would hopefully keep the snow leopards out. A second thing that they did was they started a livestock insurance program. This is an idea that came out of India. So basically, the idea is if you're a herdsman and your herd is being attacked by a snow leopard, you just let it happen, don't kill the snow leopard, and your herd will be replaced by other people in the community. A third thing that they did was they started the Snow Leopard Enterprise Program. And this is a program that helps people living in this area. By the way, there are 233 herding families who live in the Tost Mountains. This program helps them create handicrafts and other things that they can sell online in exchange for not hurting the snow leopards. And they have a lot of cute stuff if you want to check it out. Once the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation began working with the communities, they realized that actually they needed the snow leopards because the mining companies were threatening their way of life as well. So they were quickly won over by the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation. The first step in the journey to protecting the Tost Mountains that these groups accomplished together was that they convinced the government to declare the Tost Mountains a locally protected area. And so this didn't get rid of the mining, but it stopped the government from giving out new mining permits, so it at least slowed the mining down. Back to Sumbee, he was a very fast learner, and he really impressed the organization with his skills surrounding these camera traps, as well as other skills that he had. And he was hired on full-time in 2010. I'll read you a couple of quotes about what Sumbee was doing with the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation. He was our key researcher in the field conducting prey surveys using double observer methods, helping with camera trap setup, tracking down snow leopard callers whose satellite communication was broken or expired, managing the research center, maintaining good relationships with the local communities, and assisting with collaring snow leopards. Here's another quote that's pretty amazing. It says, "When water holes froze over in the South Gobi during a particularly cold winter, Mongolian research assistant Sumbee Tomorsukh carried several hundred pounds of ice up the mountain to make sure wildlife had enough water to survive." During this time, Sumbee was also getting his master's degree, and he had already co-authored at least 10 different papers by 2015. So for a few years, everything was going great for Sumbee. He was still finishing his other degree. He was working in this area that he loved, doing something that was really important to him, conservation. This was his life, his world, his life's passion. But then suddenly in May 2014, something really strange happened to Sumbee. He was living in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, and he was just walking around downtown when two guys grabbed him a little bit after sunset and held his arms back and stabbed him in the neck and arm. These guys took off running and just left poor Sumbee in the street. He was completely passed out, unconscious. But sometime during the night, he actually woke up and was able to just barely get home and then get to the hospital. Now, obviously, this was terrifying, but at the time, no one thought that this actually had anything to do with Sumbee personally or his work. They just thought it was some random gang violence and Sumbee just got unlucky, because that does happen sometimes. He also didn't report this incident to police because he was in the process of applying for a visa to come to the US to study for the summer, and he didn't want that to mess up his chances of getting approved for a visa. Sumbee did make it to the US in July. He was studying mostly in the Seattle area. So the purpose of him coming to the US was to get him trained in how to properly immobilize and collar the snow leopards. Because up until this point, there was no native Mongolian researcher who was actually trained in how to do this. By the way, I don't think I explained that. What they're trying to do with the snow leopards is put these GPS collars on them so that they can track their movements and see how large their different habitats are and if they're near each other or not and that kind of thing. He trained at a veterinary hospital, the Seattle Humane Society, the Animal Health Department at the Woodland Park Zoo, and the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the reason he went to them was because they were actually doing a similar conservation study with cougars. So they were immobilizing them and collaring them so they could track their movements. And so the idea was that somebody could go home and basically use those ideas for the snow leopards. Now, this whole conservation biology and research thing really runs strongly in the Tomorsukh family, because while Sumbee was in the US, his sister was there at the same time too, studying ecotourism. So they were able to meet up in Seattle for 2 days. And while they were hanging out, Sumbee's little sister noticed that he had his collar of his shirt popped. And she said, "Hey, what's up with that? That's weird. That's like a bad boy thing. You don't normally pop your collar. Why'd you do that?" And she reached over to turn it down, and that's when she noticed his stab wound. And so at first, Sumbee said, "There were these people who tried to kill me," but he could see that his sister was getting really upset and worried. So he tried to play it down, and he said, "But don't worry about it. It was just a random thing, and I'm here now. We're all good." Sumbee went home at the end of the summer back to Mongolia, and by the way, all those things that I mentioned that he accomplished, he did while knowing very little English, which is just amazing. It was a really short time to learn all of that, too. When he got back to Mongolia, his conservationist friends and colleagues were also asking him about this incident, because of course they were worried about him and maybe also worried about themselves. And again, he kind of downplayed it. He said that there were one or two guys giving him problems, and that was it, and it was over and done with. Unfortunately, that was not the case, because on January 5th of the next year, 2015, Sumbee was attacked a second time, and he actually wrote an email about this to his boss, Bayara. So I'm just going to read you his email. It says, "How do you do, Director Bayara? How's everything? What's new at work?" It's very polite. "I would like to tell you about something really important and request some days off. I hope you understand my situation. I think it even concerns my life being in danger. On Monday evening, I was abducted by two anonymous men with black cars, and they took me somewhere I don't know, somewhere far from the city. After that, they kept me for an hour or two in some place with a lot of noises. During that time, those two abductors started to threaten me, saying something like, 'You think you're the shit, but you're nobody, because we are the people in the city. We are people who control everything. You can't do anything. We will show you who we are,' and so on. I was so scared and terrified that I did not know what was happening and did not resist them much. Since I was not resisting them, they stopped, and I heard that one person was on the phone with someone else, And a little later, they put me in the car again and went back to the city, and they told me to run and never look back. I was in so much shock that I wanted to run away from them as far as I could. Now that I think back, I think they dropped me around Ertzagan Street. Well, briefly, this is what happened, and on Tuesday evening I went straight back to my family. Therefore, I would like to stay with my parents for a while just in case. But please don't tell anybody that I went back home. I think it's better to just keep my whereabouts quiet. I think those abductors found out I'm in the city from my Facebook. And I have some suspicion that those abductors are people from some mining company. Thus, I would like to stay with my family. Would you mind giving me an excuse for some days off, please? This time, Sumbee did report this incident to police, but they didn't take him seriously because he couldn't identify his attackers. I mean, what does that even mean? You don't know who did this, so what, it didn't happen? That's just a bunch of nonsense. Of course, later his mom said that when he came home, well, first of all, he had been crying to her on the phone. And when he got home, he was completely traumatized, of course, just as anyone would be, and he was also having nightmares. Just 3 months later, in April 2015, there was a third attack on Sumbee's life. Sumbee was riding his motorcycle in the mountains, and all of a sudden some other guys on a motorcycle came up and just hit him really hard. He managed to hold onto his bike and get down the mountain, but in the process he realized that they had stabbed him again, and he was just barely able to make it, and luckily there was an emergency helicopter ready to go, and they were able to fly him to some kind of hospital where he had to have surgery again for his stab wounds. He had one on his chest and one on each side of his stomach. So once again, because Sumbee didn't know who did this and the police didn't have any prints or evidence of who it was, they said that he must have done this himself. That's right, that's what they said. Since we don't know who it was and we don't have any evidence, well, I guess this guy just stabbed himself 3 times. Yeah, I'm sure. This was when they started kind of building this case that Sumbee must be suicidal. But the thing is that Sumbee had plans. He was planning to go to study in the UK the following January, which is not really something that a suicidal person would do. On November 5th, 2015, Sumbee left Ulaanbaatar and headed towards the South Gobi for work in his car. Unfortunately, though, he never made it. And so, of course, all of his colleagues and friends were texting him, calling him. They started to go out and look for him, and he wasn't responding, and nobody knew where he was. So everyone was just absolutely terrified. 6 days later, on November 11th, Sumbee's body was found in Lake Hovsgol, which is in northern Mongolia, the complete opposite side of the country from where Sumbee was going in the South Gobi Desert. He was just 27 years old. One account that I read said that his body was floating on the lake, and the other said that it was deep in the lake. So I'm not sure which one that was, but either way, he was 25 meters off the lake shore. So I'm sure you can guess what the police said, that this was a suicide. Sumbee had already stabbed himself 3 times, and he must have drowned himself in this lake. And by the way, they did an autopsy on him, and they did determine that his cause of death was drowning. So the police said that Sumbee must have gotten drunk, because apparently he did have a little alcohol in his system, and just run out into the lake and drown himself on purpose. Now, of course, his friends and family did not believe this for 1 second. Sumbee had no reason to be suicidal. He was very young, very healthy. He was doing what he loved. He had lots of plans for the future. And they just never saw any signs that Sumbee was suicidal at all. Plus, there was the fact that Sumbee didn't drink. Now, the police did find a half-empty bottle of vodka in his car, which was parked at the lake. And that bottle had 2 fingerprints on it, but I couldn't find whether they actually tested those fingerprints or not. Now, this created a total social media outrage in Mongolia. Everyone was tweeting and writing about it on Facebook. So between the social media pressure and pressure from the family, they demanded that Sumbee's case be investigated more thoroughly, and the case was passed around to different police agencies in the country. One thing they did was they tried to find footage of Sumbee's car on all the available CCTV cameras, and they did find one video of him, which I'm not sure if this video has ever been released to the public, but I read a description of it, and it said that Sumbee got out of the car and walked around it and then got back in, but he got back in the back seat and then the car took off. So obviously someone else was driving. The biggest piece of evidence, though, was that when Sumbee's father, Tomorsukh, was given access to Sumbee's car and opened the door, he found one of Sumbee's phones in between the seats right away. So the police were supposed to have searched this car, but it seems that they didn't do a very good job. So he finds this phone, and he actually finds multiple voice recordings that Sumbee made the day that he died. At one point, these were online, but I couldn't find them when I was doing my research, so I'm going to read you a transcript of them. The first one says this: "Today I held as a hostage. They threatened my younger siblings, said that they will harm them. I recognize them. They are the same people who had held me as a hostage before. I do not know what's the reason. I have no idea what's really happening. If the policemen did their job better, it wouldn't have happened. I would not be in this situation. Policemen not doing their job, just wasting time looking for small bickers instead of focusing on the bigger problem. Seems like these people have set their mind wanting to kill me. I think I'll be killed." And here's another one. It says, "Do you think I'm going to beg you to spare my life? No, I will never do that. I'll never beg you to spare my life." And there's one final recording that just says, "The people in the boat are coming. The people in the boat are coming. The people in the boat are coming." In the background of one of these recordings is another person yelling, "Shut up," and also a third person yelling some kind of expletive. So we know that Sumbee wasn't just by himself making these recordings. Another strange thing was that when they gave Sumbee's jacket back to his father, both jacket pockets were weighed down with sand. They were just completely full of sand. The sand was dry, but that was never mentioned in any of their police reports. Ultimately, one of the police agencies that worked on this case gave Sumbee's family a letter saying that there was no criminal element to his death. Yeah, just a suicide. But here's another thing. Usually when people drown themselves, which is unusual to begin with, they die right there in the same area. So basically they're saying that Sumbee swam all the way out, 25 meters out into this lake with sand in his pockets and purposely drowned himself there. Normally, somebody would do that closer to the shore. Sumbee's family believes that the abductors took him out to the middle of the lake and just dumped him there alive, and that's how he drowned. They think that the people who did this were either sent by mining companies or that they possibly could have been what's called ninja miners. Ninja miners are people who try to mine in the Tossed Mountains and make some money, but they're not actual employees of any mining company. They're just doing it on their own. This whole incident was obviously shocking and devastating to the international conservation community. They wrote a letter expressing their concerns, and of course, they were concerned about Sumbee getting justice, but they were also concerned about the effects of this on the Mongolian research community in general. This is what their letter says. "Dear Sir or Madam, the individuals who have signed this letter are active environmental research scientists, educators, and conservationists working in Mongolia with Mongolian scientists, and involved in the educational training of Mongolian university students and conservation practitioners. We are all very much involved in helping to understand and assist in the protection of Mongolia's environment, and have been very impressed with the country's goals of environmental protection. We have recently learned of the death of a conservation ranger, Leopard Tomorsukh, who worked with the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation, a partner of the International Snow Leopard Trust. An individual who many of us knew to be a highly conscientious and effective individual enforcing the laws and guidelines for protected areas of Mongolia. We have been told that Sumbee's body was found in Lake Hovsgol, where many of us carry on research, and that his death was likely to be ruled a suicide by drowning. We find it very difficult to understand Sumbee's death as a suicide. He was a young, 27-year-old, very energetic individual who was very enthusiastic about his work and highly respected for his efforts. He was also planning to study in England in January. Our concern emanates from the knowledge that Sumbee had been attacked on at least 3 occasions during the past 2 years by individuals who were very alarmed over what we suspect to be Sumbee's attempt to enforce laws related to protecting specific areas and threatened and endangered species. Sumbee apparently had been warned by these individuals to leave the Gobi and not to return. When he continued his work in the Gobi, he was assaulted and stabbed with a knife, but managed to escape his captors. Without a thorough investigation and transparent reporting, we believe that Sumbee's death will become an issue in future perceptions of security for people working or intending to work in conservation biology in Mongolia. These include individuals protecting and conducting research and international funders associated with research and conservation programs at Lake Hovsgol or in the Gobi or elsewhere. Ultimately, this could harm the growth of domestic and international tourism in Mongolia. We implore you to fully investigate the circumstances surrounding Sumbee's death so that the truth and complete story can be shared with all concerned. The list below of international scientists support the concerns voiced in this letter. We would greatly appreciate learning how you think this investigation can progress. And it was signed by over 40 scientists. Most of them were American, but there were also people in other countries who signed this letter. The Snow Leopard Trust released a statement on Sumbee after he died, and they said some really nice things about him. He climbed the mountains like an ibex. He ran on steep slopes where most of us would barely manage to crawl. He cared for snow leopards and ibexes as if they were his own. He helped his colleagues and communities selflessly. He was a young, promising researcher who hailed from the water-rich Kovsgol province, but had taken to the arid Gobi Desert as his second home. He was our treasured mountain climbing machine. We had never imagined we would need to use the past tense while describing Leopard Tomorsukh, fondly known as Sumbee. In January 2016, Sumbee was awarded the Helen Freeman Award. Earlier I mentioned that Helen Freeman founded the Snow Leopard Trust. At the ceremony, the executive director of the Snow Leopard Trust had this to say about Sumbee. It's going to be very hard to replace someone like Sumbee. He is irreplaceable. Sumbee was not only a Mongolian biologist and researcher, he was the world star, and we just lost our star. It is an immeasurable loss for us and the World Snow Leopard Foundation researchers. Sumbee's father, Tomorsukh Jal, came to the ceremony to take the award in Sumbee's place, and he mentioned that he had 3 goals going forward, and they were: 1. I will uncover the murderers who murdered my son. I will not stop until I find the truth behind my son's death, till my last breath. I will continue my son's legacy as to protect wildlife and Mother Nature as much as I can, with the help of all people, because we have one goal. He will not be forgotten because he will live with this passion and legacy. And finally, I will work on the Tossed Mountain and its people's goal and passion to let it register for a national reserved area. So, whoever murdered Sumbee didn't really do a very good job. because within 3 weeks of them finding his body, the government held a special meeting to discuss protecting the Tost Mountains further. In 2016, they ended up creating the Tost Tosamboomba National Reserve, which is 1.8 million acres. This was the first federally protected area for the purpose of snow leopard conservation in Mongolia. At first, they were still allowing some mining, but Bayara kept working on this cause tirelessly, and by 2018, she got all the mining in the Toss Mountain Range shut down. And today, there is no mining going on there. Bayara was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2019 for her hard work. Of course, this doesn't mean that the snow leopards in Mongolia are fully protected. Bayara and her team still have to protect them from herders and poachers and other types of potential habitat loss. By the way, in 2019, they actually expanded the preserve further, so now there's even less land for the mining companies. Bayara's next goal is to turn the nature reserve into a national park. The idea behind this is to get more ecotourism happening in Mongolia, because that could be a great source of both conservation and revenue for the herdsmen and the government in general. So basically, Sumbee ended up a martyr, and he caused what the mining companies were trying to stop to happen even faster than it would have happened if they had just left him alone. So if anyone out there is thinking about hatching a little plan like this, I would suggest that you think twice, because this kind of thing happens a lot. It's just heartbreaking to think of all that Sumbee could have accomplished if he had been allowed to live beyond his 27 years. He was just absolutely amazing, and there are so many places in this world who could have used his work and his help in the goal of conservation, and we'll never get to know what he was really capable of in the coming decades of his career. It's just heartbreaking that we lost him. I'm so sorry that Mongolia has lost him and that the world has lost Sumbee. It's just terribly sad. Of course, I want to know what you think. Do you think it is possible that Sumbee died by suicide? Or do you think it was definitely a murder? And if it was a murder, do you think it's possible that the murderers could possibly be caught someday? Let me know in the comments. It's just a terribly sad story, but that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.